Muslims are between 4.5 to 5% of the national population, but over 11% of NHS employees tick the Muslim box when asked. Why should this be? Well, it is, as I suspect is the case with religious practitioners in other idealistic religious communities, partly the result of a desire to serve. One of the noblest things one can do is to tend to the sick, know what to say to the frail elderly, know what to say when a mother's baby is in an incubator. There is always the human dimension. We are not simply machines, although at times modern medicine tends to mechanize our metabolism in ways that perhaps the better science regards as a little bit reductionist and not aware of the close synergy that exists between what religionists would say body and spirit. So there's an element of idealism there. But what's interesting to me is that this is one area of life where religious boundaries are kind of blurred, and because we all share the same basic specifications of our species, become not terribly relevant. And if you look at the history of Islamic medicine, I can recommend a book by Manfred Ullmann, who's a German professor, History of Islamic Medicine, but there are other good books as well. One of the interesting things, despite our image of the Middle Ages as having been a time of religious exclusion and zeal, is that it was actually a very multi-ethnic and multi-confessional profession. Many of the early physicians in the early Muslim world were actually Christians. The famous Ibn Bakhtishur family, who were from Iran, who'd been practicing medicine in Iran before the arrival of Islam, continued to be valued for their medical prowess. The great Saladin, one of the iconic heroes of medieval Islam, the one who liberated Jerusalem, chose as his personal physician Musa ibn Maymun, also known as Maimonides, who was also the best known thinker of rabbinic Judaism in the Middle Ages. And this champion of the faith didn't think twice. The Jew did a better job. The Jew got the job. And so on. And we find also that the influence of the medieval Islamic medical universe did a lot to trigger the development of the medical profession in medieval and early modern Europe. Ullmann goes on to say that the origin of the hospital is actually in the Islamic world. The Maristan goes on through the mediation of Muslim institutions in Sicily under the Norman court, Roger II, to become the basis of the hospital tradition in Western Europe. Many of the early medical foundational discoveries come from the Islamic world. Abu Bakr al-Razi is said to have been the first to have performed a cataract operation. Ibn al-Nafis is said to have been the first to speak about the lesser circulation of the blood and so on. And this is all well documented. And in fact, when these veils are lifted later on, I think you'll be able to see that we have an exhibition of medieval Islamic scientific instruments, and you'll see, in some cases, some of the rather fearsome-looking surgical instruments that were used by medieval Muslims. And why was medieval Islam so keen on the physician's calling when religion is about the spirit, it's about the next world, it's about renunciation? Why this focus on the body? Well, because Islam, like every kind of sensible traditional worldview, recognizes that body and soul are not kind of two separable dualistic entities, but interactive and interdependent. We all know that we're more liable to fall sick if we're feeling depressed. And you physicians will know that kind of thing much better than I. But the origins of Islam are, of course, with the Holy Prophet. And we do find in the Muslim scripture called Hadith separate sections called the Book of Medicine. It might seem odd to find a book of medicine in a revealed scripture, but there it is, and we find the Prophet frequently called upon not just to do supernatural things like casting out evil spirits, but also to heal people's physical ailments. He suffered from sicknesses and fevers himself. One of his names is At-Tabib. I was in the holy city of Medina last week, and on the wall towards which everybody prays, there's most of the traditional names of the Prophet in beautiful Ottoman calligraphy. There's said to be about 300 altogether. One of them is the physician, the healer. And to this day, in any Muslim bookshop, you can buy books of traditional Islamic medicine, which tends to be mainly sort of herbal medicine, which is practiced to this day as a complementary practice in just about every Muslim culture. So we have these accounts of the Prophet treated as healer, as well as prophet, telling people about the unseen world. So there's this prophetic sacred tradition of tending to the sick and recognizing the sanctity of the human form, which has been lovingly sculpted by the Creator and is therefore worthy of every close attention and care. Throughout the history of the religion and impacting even here in Cambridge, I was interested to note that until the 18th century, one of the textbooks at Addenbrooke's was actually by Avicenna, a medieval Muslim physician and philosopher, who used to go off to the mosque when he was puzzled by some question and pray for guidance. And his textbook from the medieval Islamic world was foundational in the medical curriculum here in Cambridge. So a kind of universal blessing, again showing that medicine, because it's about what's most universal about us as a species, is quite good at traversing and overcoming cultural differences and barriers. And so we as Muslims have this rich and honourable tradition. And we have healthy practices which are part of the religion itself. Walter Kaigi, who has a book on early Islam and the transformations that came across North Africa and the Middle East as a result of the first Islamic conquests, wonders why there seems to have been a sudden demographic boost following these conquests, so that cities like Baghdad and Cordoba were by far the largest cities in the world. At a time when there were 50,000 people in Paris, the largest city in Christendom, there was 1 million people in Muslim Cordoba and a similar number, it seems, in Baghdad. How was this possible? Why did the population suddenly spike? And he has quite a sort of workaday explanation for this. And that is that one of the obligations of Muslim worship is that you have to purify yourself with water before you pray 5 times a day, otherwise it's not valid and you're wasting your time. Why is that relevant? Go to one of the hotels, I forget its name, opposite what used to be the Great Mosque in Cordoba, and in the lobby while you're waiting to check in, you can see that there's glass on the floor, and you can look underneath and you can see these big stones and rock channels and things. That's because in excavations they discovered the basis for the ablution system that brought copious quantities of water so that the Moorish Muslims could ablute before using the mosque. And it's a condition of that water that it has to be free of taste, has to be free of smell, has to be free of colour. Otherwise it's no good. You can't use it, you can't pray. It's fundamental to the religion. You have to have clean water in the centre of every city where there are Muslims. So for Kaigi, he says, that's the reason why the population of medieval Islamic cities was so big, because a lot of water-carried diseases actually diminished very considerably. Things like typhus and cholera were not unknown, but were much less because of the Muslim emphasis on personal hygiene and the need to have a pure water supply in the centre of these huge conurbations. So one could talk about other aspects of religion that are health positive, but maybe that's one example that kind of supports my point. But with this rich heritage, what do we have today in the Islamic world? It's not really quite exemplary, it has to be said. So again, we are all in this together. And the discoveries and the accomplishments and the challenges of modern science and technology and medical technology and the pharmaceutical industry are kind of equally applicable to just about everybody. It seems to me that an event such as this, project such as this, Macmillan Cancer. On this kind of platform, we can be brought together in a way which in our divided world is probably rather timely when you look at religious differences in India and Palestine and so many places where religionists can't look each other in the eye. Hospitals, the caring profession should be places where there can be that recognition that we're all really the same thing. And there's an important lesson in that. So it was a good experience, a positive experience for me to be serving the busy medics of Addenbrooke's and to realise the, I think, honourable contribution that Muslim communities and ethnic minorities are making disproportionately to the well-being of the country. And as prejudices and misunderstandings grow, the far right on the march across Europe, wild riots outside mosques in the north of England last July, an unhappy discourse of mistrust and anxiety about immigration, multiculturalism, diversity. It's interesting to think that the first 3 NHS doctors who died of COVID were actually all Muslims. You can be a skinhead out to get the Muslims, but if you're in the plastic tent on the incubator and you look out and you see the nurse in the hijab trying to keep you alive, things start to look a little bit different. So I think that Muslims in the caring professions and the NHS in particular can punch above their weight in order to help everybody realise, Muslims included, that as humanity we face shared challenges. We're all in this together. We're basically the same thing. And that, I think, is one of the most important lessons and blessings that can come out of the medical profession in our age. It's not just about physiology and pharmaceuticals, it's about human sharing and that beautiful Quranic verse, God has created you of tribes and languages and colours so that you might come to know and understand each other. There's no Tower of Babel legend, difference is a kind of curse. Instead, it's a blessing. And humanity has to rise above certain primitive tribalisms and insecurities to realise the blessing that is in diversity. And it's my hope and my expectation, my experience, that it's in the hospitals and the clinics and the little overcrowded, overworked GP drop-in surgeries, that important social alchemy, which is so important for the well-being of our world, will begin, and inshallah will gather momentum, and the forces of division and suspicion on all sides can be overcome. So welcome everybody to this event. I think we're feeling the blessings of this shared event to see every possible community here as we go past the stalls and we munch on our samosas and then consider information about diabetes and cancer and things and kind of juxtapose those two things. And perhaps there's an intentional irony going on here. We all have our limitations, not just the Muslim community that goes to Dunkin' Donuts right after praying in the holiest place on earth, but the GPs who smoke, and we're all weak. Shouldn't be any judgment there, but it's an opportunity to think about this miracle of the human body, which God has entrusted to us for a few short decades or years or days on this earth, and to see that it's something sacred in the image of God rather than just meat machines. And that, I think, is the specific contribution that religions and spiritual traditions can make in our increasingly mechanistic and dualistic universe.